Hello, I'm Mike Bellows, and welcome to this edition of Other People's Pockets. I always say live TV is one of the worst things you can do. That's why a lot of people like them taped, except a few years ago when you had a chance to listen to Bill O'Reilly say, yeah, I'm going to do it live and swear at the camera and everything else when he didn't quite get his way. But there are a lot of things that have been happening at the legislature this week anyway. And one of the things that came up today, they talk about the so-called nanny state. And it's going to be hard for law enforcement to simply check for all these things. It's House Bill 510, sponsored by Jill Conower, and it's a minor passenger seat belt violation as a primary offense. Well, we just got rid of the other primary seatbelt law. And we still have a law. It's a secondary law. It still works. But how are they going to check this out? Because many kids, between 16 and 18, they all look pretty similar. So we're going to have people stopped for no justifiable reason, just because the guy might be smoking, just to see if the people have their seatbelt on. That's just kind of strange, and that is going to be coming up in the transportation hearing on February 20th, which is a Friday. And as always, you can call the Capitol switchboard at 444-4800, and you can leave a message for a committee or up to 6 legislative folks at one time. They also had a law that would look at banning smoking in relation to childs. Another one of those nanny laws that seemed like it's useful to try to catch people and try to enforce, basically, because there's a law in Canada basically does the same thing. But here in Canada, you can't buy cigarettes when you're underage, but you can legally smoke them up there. So if like they mentioned in one article, the guy got pulled over. It was a $155 fine for smoking with kids around, but yet her daughter got out of the car. His daughter got out of the car, picked up a cigarette, and started smoking because she could legally smoke too. And so you've got some strange things within the law itself that doesn't seem to work too well. And also we have there's various zoning laws too that have coming up. I know in Ravalli County they got rid of their growth policy mainly because all things derive in terms of your property rights derive from the growth policy. And here's this is a bill by one of our local politicians, Michelle Reinhardt, HB 455, that wants to put more zoning requirements on your laws. It's called on your land. It's called Big Sky Rivers Act, and it basically allows counties and cities to zone your property if you live close by to a river. And it makes common sense to not build your home too close to a river, because obviously rivers do change course every once in a while, and we've seen a few years ago up in Sanders County where the disaster preparedness person had his home washed away because the river simply changed course. And so it's hard, I think, to really legislate common sense, even though we try to do that. And it's a bit of socialism here that most people don't really like. Another one that Michelle Reinhardt has, it's House Bill 524. It comes up actually tomorrow in the House Local Government Committee, and it says it's to establish procedures and requirements for county privatization of services. Well, actually, I think if you're going to look at county privatization and those kinds of services, we're going to have a plan in place anyway, and so why would we need another bill simply to tell taxpayers that, look, if we privatize this thing, if we gave it to somebody else, that we'd save quite a bit of money. I know in the city of Indianapolis, Indiana, they privatized their wastewater treatment plant, and they ended up saving about $21 million a year based on that. So there's lots of examples out there of municipalities that have actually saved taxpayers' money by switching to private services. But I don't think you'd see that in Missoula, because Missoula is basically becoming like an employment agency. We get these new laws, we get these new regulations and new coastal departments, and we have to have insurance, we have to have supplies, we have to have all the necessarily work comp and stuff, and so we end up getting basically a whole new department. We saw that with neighborhood councils. When they got passed, neighborhood councils weren't supposed to be funded. They were just supposed to be advisory committees that would advise various agencies, but now they've become under their own, and their budget, I haven't saw a recent figure, but I imagine it's probably over 100,000 just for neighborhood councils. That really was supposed to be zero. And here's Mike Jopak. I think he's a Democrat out of Whitefish. House Bill 620 authorized unincorporated areas to organize for planning and providing services. So even the unorganized areas, they want to have zoning departments, planning departments. Sometimes I think we plan ourselves out of existence. Land use has its own extensive plans. You're not going to have, gravel pits in downtown Missoula, nor will you have a large super Walmart in downtown Missoula. It's just not feasible. But still, we feel that we need to have laws and regulations that tell us exactly how many houses we can have on our land, what kind of trees, what kind of sidewalks. And there's even laws that tell you how high your fence can be. In Missoula, you can't have a fence higher than 6 feet. So if your fence happens to be 10 feet, they're going to come down and chop it off, or make you chop it off, and they might just go ahead and do that anyway. And the nanny state sometimes gets too far. I mean, here's a bill coming up tomorrow, HB 620, require written estimates for vehicle repair. That certainly is common sense. I would imagine if I got my car repaired, I'd want an estimate of what it's going to cost and what are the parts involved. We're trying to change people's habits, and it's a good thing, mind you. But is that something that consumers really should be doing rather than requiring? I mean, a good business will obviously do that anyway. If a business doesn't give you a good estimate, then you probably shouldn't be shopping at that business. Oh, and here's a law, HB 556, required notification of this, 594, which is also in the State House Administration by Chuck Hunter, limit state bonuses to employees. Well, as we've seen with some of the past news accounts of, say, the Secretary of State's office giving end of the year bonuses for their employees that were not going to be there, you kind of wonder about some of that stuff. And obviously, you sign on for innovations and stuff. Maybe there should be some bonuses for reducing services, reducing programs, and giving the taxpayers some money back. And those kinds of laws, I think, are probably very good. Then we also hear, about the constituent funds account. These are the accounts that were essentially banned unless you, for new setups, if you were an old legislative person, you probably already had one, and you can still use one. But most of this money can go to re-election funds and other odd things, and so now they have had various laws either to get rid of them, which Roy Brown wanted to do, which didn't make it out of committee. And here's something from Dennis Himmelberger out of Billings, who just wants to clarify fund account laws. And I think sometimes they should just get rid of them and not have to worry about it. Here's some more growth policy bills, and this is from the Senate Local Government Committee. Growth policy to include sand and gravel resource property rights. Well, if you're a sand and gravel person and you live next door, if you move next door to a sand and gravel pit, you've got to realize that you might pick up some sand and other things coming from the pit. So I think they do have some property rights as long as they're not interfering on your property rights. So there's all kinds of different, really, things out there. We've mentioned House Bill 524. This was introduced by Michelle Reinhardt of Missoula. And it says a bill for an act entitling procedures and requirements for a county government to follow for proposed privatization of services currently provided by a county and providing an effective date. These are all is a brand new law. And basically, it's going to cost some study money for this to happen. I don't think it's really necessary. I think governments by themselves should be looking at these types of things, and if the private sector can do it much cheaper, they should. This is another one of those finance bills, House Bill 449, introduced by McChesney. And it's a bill or an act entitled An Act Generally Revising State and Local Government Laws Related to Finance, revising notice, information, and connecting with the intention to create rural special improvement districts. And what this basically it does is it includes everybody. There's no exemption. So I'm wondering if the cities are going to come out against this bill because they're going to have to start paying for their own indebtedness. And really, I think when they're going to pass these general obligation bonds in these rural special improvement districts, they really should go for 76%, at least a supermajority rather than 50 plus 1, because there's no reason to force the other 49% into paying for something they may not want to pay for. You know, we always have that argument here in Missoula that there's a lot of people that have septic systems. There's a lot of people that are looking at alternative ways to treat their waste, but yet the city is saying, no, we must get these guys into the sewer system district because we had a lawsuit and we need money to pay for this thing, so they need more customers, and any way they can force people to join the system, I don't think that's a good idea for that to happen. And so I'm sure you're going to see some of the cities come out against this bill, because when you look at the fiscal note, it says the bill provides for tax-exempt property in the district to contribute to the payment of debt service of general obligation bonds of a water and sewer district. This bill could have potential financial impact on counties if the county owned land in water and sewer districts. And it was not determined if the impact would be significant, but I guess, you know, sometimes the county owns quite a bit of land, like here in Missoula. They were talking about moving the fair, and they set up some of those land by the airport that was county owned. And these are always some of those strange bills that I just really hate, because it tends to legalize a monopoly. This was introduced by Carolyn Squires and some other Democrats, and it says a bill for an act entitled An Act Providing for the Regulation and License of Marriage and Family Therapists, and providing definitions, providing licensure requirements and privileges for marriage and family therapists, providing certain exemptions from licensure as marriage and family therapists, and providing penalties and amending and providing an effective date. Really what they're trying to do is make sure that you pay a fee and sign a state registry, and I do think that's the wrong way to simply look at things. Those are some of the basic things that really has to change. I mean, we talk about private property rights and the whole bit. This is an article based out of, well, it's about Colorado, and it talks about ranchers in Colorado's Pinyon Canyon fight a massive Army land grab. We heard today, if you go onto the Billings Gazette website, that a couple of the nature conservative groups put down some money on some land. They sold it to the feds. And they made a bundle out of it. And now the feds own some more land. But this talks about Mark Loudon spits Copenhagen juice on the floor of an empty storage bay of his shuttered feed store in Trinidad, a small town in southeastern Colorado, an hour's drive from Loudon's ranch. He rests his hand on a leather cell phone holster like a gunslinger's might. Then he grins, or maybe it's just he doesn't frown. He's letting something happen that's pretty alien to his nature. There's a photographer with a lens in about 2 inches from the nose on Loudon's live sea creased, leather-worn face crowding his personal space. Under other circumstances, someone this far inside his personal space would get some spacious pushback. But Loudon, an activist for the group, Not One More Acre, puts up with the inconvenience, with the cause asked for, or what the cause asked for, ranchers like Loudon give. The alternative is an end to a life as they know it. Publicity is powerful, if uncomfortable weapon for people accustomed to their privacy, for whom property lines and personal space are more important than mere law. In the asymmetrical war these ranchers are fighting, they use any weapons they can, but because there's an opponent that tends to win, this is the U.S. Army. The Army already occupies 245,000 acres of Colorado's desolate Pinon Canyon, which it uses for large-scale force-on-force mechanized brigade combat exercises involving tanks and armored units. But since 2006, Uncle Sam had his eye on at least another 418,000 acres more to handle increased demand for maneuvers and expansion of Fort Carson. Most of that land is private property in Comanche National Grasslands lying between the rustic towns of La Junta, Trinidad, and Williamsburg. The proposed annexation, which would create a continuous area, 85% of the size of Rhode Island, has attracted loud opposition from local landowners, environmentalists, scientists, politicians. Their combined efforts were enough to gain a congressionally order in 2007, but the Army appears determined to wear them down. In fact, the training ground expansion may just be the first phase of an egregious land grab, potentially involving millions of acres. The Army's land envy is why Loudon, the 58-year-old son and grandson of Colorado ranchers, closed Marty Feeds, a Trinidad landmark, for almost a century in the summer of 2008. He could run a ranch, run a business, or fight the land grab, but not all three at once. He said when it comes down to it, this is what is important, Loudon says, sitting upstairs in a nearly vacant building, aloft the photo shoot, spitting into a paper cup to underline his cup. It's driving my wife crazy how much time this has taken, but no matter what it costs, I'd fight it again if I had the chance, he says. This land is not for sale at any price. Pinon Canyon is a barren but ranchable landscape on the east side of the Continental Divide that resembles the kind of high desert environment found in the mountains of Iraq, which is one reason the military uses it for training. The Army says the feds needs to expand the existing Pinon Canyon maneuver site when more and more mechanized use it out of nearby Fort Carson, conduct live training exercises twice a year. The additional space is needed, the amount to enable the Fort Carson's growth and to allow units larger than the battalion to conduct exercises on a wider variety of terrain. Opponents say that such a seizure would devastate local economies, affecting as many as 50,000 people who live in the three towns surrounding the PMCS, plus 567 ranches, more than $20 million a year in agricultural production, mostly in the form of cattle. Lois Robertson, a neighbor of Loudon's, meaning his property is within 20 miles of the head of Pinon Canyon Expansion Opposition Coalition, emphasizes that it's not just about the land, the impact on this whole region. That will be monumental, Robertson says. It will be devastating. Aside from the estimated 20 million in ranching businesses directly affected, neighboring ranches will feel the impact of nearby maneuvers, live fire tank battles, will disturb both rancher and ranched, and the closing of certain track roads in close to Loudon's 1-hour drive from his ranch to Trinidad, for example. It's like into a 2-hour detour on the new maneuver site. Most of that will depend on ranching and agricultural commerce. And expansion could mean an end unless the ghost towns are turned into urban warfare training sites. And since the ranch deeds in these parts go back to the Homestead Act of 1862, which have more than 60 acres of gave more than 160 acres of unoccupied land to anyone moving west in exchange for a small fee and 5 years residency, folks here refer to each other's land as country, as in, this is Kinney's country over there. Loudon's family traces its roots back to 1902, when his grandfather rode on horseback from Indiana down the Santa Fe Trail and settled about 60 miles east of Trinidad. This land is not for sale at any price, Loudon says, repeating a phrase you can find on bumper stickers and yard signs throughout the area. The Department of Defense already owns about 25 million acres in the United States, of which the Army share is 15 million. The military says it's not because of to train the right way, it needs certain kinds of terrain with certain proximity to existing bases, and it needs lots of it. Locals have an answer to that, not one more acre. The battle cry is named in their nonprofit action group. The parent Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site is 245,000 acres long and around the Victoire River. It is taken or purchased after eminent domain proceeding in September 1983 at a cost of about $26 million, $53 million in today's dollars, plus $2 million for relocating dozens of ranchers and their families. Southwest Coloradans were promised two things in return: that there would be no further expansion and that the PCMS would not be used for future exercises. I reiterate that there will be no live firing at a PM or PCMS. A major general at Fort Carson wrote to a participant at one of the preliminary final hearings on the initial Pinyon Canyon seizures in a later letter dated July 30th, 1980. Of course, but their promises has not been kept, and some of the same people in the Army right now had their same people in the area had their ranch taken a quarter of a century ago. These people are not your typical anti-military types. They're die-in-the-wool and ranchers, and many of them are service veterans. They just don't see why the Army, with their land, given all it already has, if they need it for legitimate defense of our country, I think everyone, last one of us, would give them our land, he says, but they don't need this land. They just want it. They already have over 2 million acres. Why do they need land here, it says. And so it goes on, and then it's going to... So there has been they also found some fossils, and they found a number of dinosaur fossils and footprints in the area. So the opposition has grown into a broad coalition: paleontologists, archaeologists, tribal leaders, and business leaders. And so they don't want this planned land to be seized through eminent domain, which study documents as it did back in the 1980s. Well, since national defense is declared public use, as in the Fifth Amendment. But since so many Colorado ranchers have mobilized, have heard this before, they mobilized against it immediately. So hopefully, the Army will finally just give up on this thing, because the Army still says they need to take over some $6 million acres of private land. And that's land from the Forest Service to form an installation for service as well as foreign foreign allied forces. So we can already see that we're going to have some foreign forces on our land. This land grab would be the first of which the Army acquisition is now seeking in Pinyon Canyon transfer. That would certainly get rid of the residents. So it's amazing that here we are trying to protect the rights of property owners. We're trying to protect the rights under the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And yet we all treasure security, but we all realize that our land shouldn't be simply taken over using the eminent domain for this type of stuff. So I hope that they, excuse me, do their duty and find some other place. I mean, we've had lots of desert areas where there's not even anybody using those things, let alone trying to take people's livelihoods and properties away. Yeah, so talked about some of the legislature bills coming up. We also have to realize that, well, for most of these bills to pass, February 27th is the transmittal date. So any bill that is stuck in committee or is stuck in either House or Senate and not transmitted to the other side by February 27th will be dead on arrival. And it just seems odd in terms of some of the election laws that are coming up. But they certainly want to get rid of people allowing the signature gatherers at polling places no further than 100 feet from the polling place. I think they should just have tables and set the number of ballot issues on the tables and let people sign. I don't think that's really a problem. I've had the opportunity to collect signatures at some of the polling places, and it does seem like that some of these people, especially if they hate your issue or the initiative, will say you can't petition here, and they do it to the darn bestest to sort of throw you out, which I think is a wrong way of dealing with things. Of course, there's a lot of issues I don't like, but at least sometimes if the citizens are smart enough, they can just say, no, we don't really want to put this on the ballot, as would happen with the CHIP program. And there's an article in today's paper, the Billings Gazette website, where Republicans voted down the funding for the newly enacted initiative that was to give increase the program for CHIPs. And I know that I'm not doing my patriotic job in starting smoking, because that's what's used to pay for all this CHIP program money anyway, for the most part, is taxes on cigarettes. And we just heard from the federal congressional action, and I'm sure Obama's already signed it, that your cigarette taxes will be going up $1 a pack to fund health and the children's health insurance program. And the Republicans already increased Montana's share back in 2003, 50 cents, plus we had the ballot initiative some years ago that put in $1. So within the last 6-7 years, cigarette taxes have increased over $3. And so that just brings me a problem, that why aren't those folks who want more funding going out there and smoking? I don't know that they're trying to outlaw smoking with children in the car, and that's just how far does the nanny state really want to go on some of those things? I think it's really ridiculous at times, and you really would like to see change. Another change that's going to want to happen these days is Senate Bill 469, revised primary election laws. You know, Montana has a closed primary, so that when you go to the voting booth, you get a choice of the number of ballots of qualified political parties that will be in the primary ballot. But John Briggerman at Polson simply wants to change that and give you one ballot for all candidates. It would be a bad idea. It would save a little bit of money in the long term. I think a better way, which a lot of people would rather see, is just have these political parties nominate by convention, because that way their membership would be at the convention and they would simply vote. Because otherwise you're having, like they like to point out, some of these bills that have been put before the legislature for having only registered members vote in their primaries. I think it's time we get rid of primaries. I mean, they're costing us anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 a year, and, you know, and then plus we've got the school primaries and the school election bonds in May. I mean, and let's face it, they have to print up ballots for all the people that are registered, and so that's the cost in itself right there. And so we could either, actually, we could just vote. Move everything to April 15th. That'd be my way of thinking, but that's simply not going to happen. You know, and here you've got, this deals with illegal aliens, but where did I see that? House the Senate Bill 380 by Jim Shockley out of Victor, who simply says we need to prohibit vehicle registration for unauthorized aliens. Well, as it stands now, anybody could go down to the courthouse and register a car as long as they had a U.S. Address, and that might be the way to do things. I think it's got its merits. I certainly wouldn't want to go down there and give my national ID number and everything else to them just because I have a car that needs registering. Yeah, here's another one that I'm sure you'll get some people that won't like this one because we've already talked about marriage counselors, but this is Senate Bill 448, which would allow a county commissioner before marriage. Well, that's what we got into this mess in the marriage mess in the first place, that states allow gays to get married because we allow the state to take over marriage. I don't think the state should be involved in marriage in the first place. It's a marriage between you and your wife and God. That's the way it's supposed to be. It's not you, your wife, God, and the government. So I would hope if you really hated some of these bills to call up your legislators. You can go on the website www.lag.montana.gov and find out who your representative is. And of course, you can always call 406-444-4800, and you can leave a message to up to 6 legislative people or to a whole committee. Let them know that you're not too happy with allowing more government officials to simply get into the marriage business, because marriage actually is it's got a lot of libertarians who say, well, if the church wants to marry the gays and lesbians, that's up to the church, but it really shouldn't be up to the government to say, look, we're just going to stop marriage completely, because government really should be out of the marriage business. Now here we're going to spend more money on studying recycle and reuse in Montana. Well, we already know that a lot of people do recycle. They recycle cans, they recycle newspapers. Some of that stuff is a cost to recycle. Plastic bottles. Some of that stuff you got to pay to recycle, and so therefore it's not going to be recyclable. But so I'm not sure why we need to fund more money for more studies. I mean, it doesn't really do us any good, and we already know that there's certain things that would benefit us if we do study, and we're obviously Montanans do recycle quite a bit. I like this one, and I do have to call up the legislature for this one. This was by Bill Nooney, more of a liberal Republican in some ways. This is House Bill 531, which prohibits use technology for issuing citations not witnessed by the officer. And this mainly goes after things like the red light cameras in various municipalities around the country. Red light cameras are being installed. It mainly brings lots of revenue to the cities and to the companies that install these cameras, but they're not infallible. There have been lots of places where they get the wrong pictures, and they're not foolproof. And so this would be a good thing to call up your legislative panel and say, look, we don't particularly like this, the fact this intrusion. People know that they shouldn't be running red lights or stoplights, and better just have a law enforcement officer. And actually it should be peace officers. In the old days, they used to be peace officers because they just kept the peace. They didn't have to enforce all these ridiculous laws that Helena wanted to put together. There's another Democrat, Jill Conower, revised eminent domain laws on necessary for railroads. So they're really pushing for spend more money on railroads that hardly anybody rides these days, and actually, buses tend to have a better financially, they're better uses, financially wise, rather than railroads. And who wants to lose their property just because of the railroads? Well, anyway, we're just about out of time, and so anyway, you can catch us next time in Other People's Pockets For this Wednesday's edition, I'm Mike Fellows, and we'll see you next time. Thank you and have a good evening.